Welcome to this week's episode of Sojourner, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
Welcome back to the ongoing series, How Spaces Define Masculinity, a Black and Black Biracial Men's Initiative. My name is Carol Jean Matthews-Shifflett, and I am the CEO of the Sojourner Group. I'd like to start by thanking my sponsors, the Utah Jazz, Planned Parenthood Association of Utah, Pacific Island Knowledge to Action Resource, PCAR, the Utah Coalition Against Sexual Assault, UCASA, and Enlightened Productions. In Session 3, I'm bringing you 3 men who will speak to you from the LGBTQI+ perspective. Dr. Cleveland Hayes, Associate Dean of Academic Affairs, Professor, Indiana University, Indiana, active member of the American Education Research Association, AERA, an active reserve of the United States Air Force, and his foundation, Meridian, Mississippi. Next, we have Dr. Kenyon Anderson, MSW, PPSC, founder and president at Always Progressing, Inc., and his foundation was Long Beach, California. And lastly, we have OBO Jones, a content creator, entrepreneur. His foundation, Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, gentlemen. What about, and we'll start with you, Dr. Anderson, what about in your community? What did it mean to be a man in that community that you grew up in?
Again, for me, it goes back to protecting, fighting, and standing your ground. Unfortunately, that was the community that I was raised in. So there was a lot of demonstrations of manliness and of masculinity and of not allowing people to say things or do things to you that are, I'm going to say air quotes, disrespectful or sort of those things. So growing up, I felt like that there was a lot of fighting and or the need to have your ego stroked in order to be reaffirmed. And that was just sort of a lot of what I experienced in the community I grew up in.
Okay. All right. Dr. Hayes.
It really, I think, depended upon the context that I was in terms of community. I know I hear a lot of people, I can remember, and I sort of kind of reflect on this as I got older, I would hear people talk about that they would hear this hate speech coming out of the church, and the minister is talking, the pastor of the church, whatever, I grew up in the church, about condemning homosexuality and all this kind of stuff. And I never experienced that. The whole time that I was home growing up, I never heard a minister that I had say that. Keep in mind, this is in the South in the mid-70s, and it never heard it. School, when I was at school, because I was a band person, so I didn't play, and so that created some sort of kind of identities around being male, being a man and being in band, but there were a lot of hyper-masculine men in band. So for some, it was okay. For me, it wasn't necessarily okay. So it really sort of kind of depended upon the context that I was in.
Okay. All right. What about you, Mr. Jones?
Yeah, I kind of more identify with what Dr. Anderson said. I think of two things when I think of how a man is supposed to respond in the community when I was growing up. And you were supposed to chase women and demand respect. That's pretty much what you did, right? And so for me, that's where you live in. So that's what I did. I chased women. I was always, whatever girl liked me, I liked her back. You know what I mean? Or whatever, the things. And whoever talked to me crazy, I was ready to fight. And I think it was rooted in a lot of discomfort. And it's funny now, I was talking to a friend not long ago about, he was kind of praising me for some accolades I had gotten. And I was telling him that a lot of my accolades were rooted in me trying to be the best I could be because I knew my sexuality was going to cripple me, right? So it's I spent a lot of my younger time being let me make sure that I'm on my A game because there's going to be a thing if this comes to the forefront that's going to discount all that I am. So I need to make sure that I have enough on the opposite side of the spectrum to then give it a rebuttal. And even now, to a certain degree, if someone hears I'm gay, no, you're not gay, you can fight. he not gay, he can cut hair. He not gay, he work out. Like the two things are mutually exclusive. You know what I'm saying? And it's like,
Yeah.
you know, the two things can happen at the same time, but I spent my time trying to cultivate almost a perfect person so I could then like make sure if this was ever coming to the forefront. If I got suspected a little bit, they would then be able to say, oh, well, nah, he can't be because. And that's kind of how I spent my community time when I was young.
So people have this idea, and that's why we're having this webinar, that if you're gay, then you definitely can't be masculine, period. There's no question. That's just a dot, period.
And can I say really quickly, and not to cut you off or anything, but
No,
I'm always, because I identify as a masculine man, I know that my presence is necessary in a valid part of the community, but I never want to discount the space that feminine men or effeminate men inhibit, right? So I think these conversations, I want to make sure that we make sure that it's not a conversation saying that femininity is bad or wrong or not okay for men to possess. It's just saying that there's also another side of the spectrum where masculine men are as well. I just want to make that very clear.
Does anybody want to elaborate on what OVO just said, or Mr. Jones just said?
I think that what you said to me is really important because I've observed a lot and I've experienced performance. So when we think about what we've done and how we've done it, and I've also sort of fallen into I'm going to have all of these accolades. Like I was a doctor in under 30. I was a homeowner. I was a provider. I did all of these things that make me the anti of like being gay, when it's like reality is that duality does exist. And I think it's really important. And I like that you brought this up because we need representation across the spectrum of who we can be. I didn't know that I could be a Black man with Christian values and educated and a business owner. Like I didn't have representation of that as an option. So I found myself not identifying in any space that I was ever in. Okay. So as we think about like what that looks like, it's really important to be able to show like that whether you're masked or you're femme or whether or not like you present a particular way, we need to have representation that all of these things are possible in order for people who to come after us to know that it's okay to live in their full truth.
Okay. All right. Dr. Hayes, you want to elaborate on that?
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right. So the next question because I think we already talked about the understanding of masculinity. Because we support mainly women who've been victimized by sexual assault and domestic violence, I want to know, what was your understanding of the role of masculinity in regard to the treatment of women? Go ahead, Dr. Hayes, since you're right there, we'll go ahead and start with you.
You know, I had some male friends of mine that were in high school. Now that I sort of kind of think about it, that I would consider that were really, really sort of kind of disrespectful to women, and I think most of my experiences, at least from the surface, I didn't see a whole lot of, even with my parents, I didn't see a whole lot of this need to be over hyper masculinized toward women, and I think probably because of my gay self, most of my friends were women, because that was a safe space for me, as opposed to having a whole lot of male friends, and which is interestingly now most of my friends are straight Black men, in comparison to what it was when I was in high school, where they were mostly cis hetero women. So to answer that question, I just knew, like, sort of kind of this early on. I think part of it is because I had such high regard for the women in my life, which were my grandmothers, my mother, and my sisters, that I just knew I just thought it was just sort of kind of just par for the course, and that's how that sort of kind of came about.
Okay. There is a question here. The generation. Do you all mind telling your age? And in doing so, can you speak to any differences in how gay men were accepted into or marginalized from a broader community? So if you don't mind sharing your age, it's just a number. It's just a number, y'all. Go ahead.
I'll go. So I'm 30. And in terms of like the perception, I think that for me, I experienced, because I went off to college, sort of a flight from my community in terms of my ability to be able to express myself. So like within my community, I believe that even now, like when I go home or I'm with particular people that I grew up with, a lot of the same nuances that I felt as a kid still exist currently. I just happen to not dominantly be in those spaces where it is a constant reminder of those sorts of things. I do know that sort of in terms of a time reference, there were older adults in my extended family who I suspect were gay, but they lived under the umbrella that nobody talked about it. That's your auntie friend, but nobody mentions like the fact that she stays the night. Like it's just very a non-nuanced, like they just didn't talk about it at all. And like I remember like, you know, having conversations with particular people in my family now, and it's like, well, why couldn't you just do it this way? And it's like, if you want to live in a box, that's fine. Mm-hmm. That may have worked for your time period, but I'm not gonna limit my life and my experiences to duplicate something that I truly don't think made them happy. But sort of like seeing that there is sort of this pressure of the older generation, people who are a lot older than, not a lot older, but older than me, feeling like the generation that is like in their tweens right now were too expressive and they should hide it and they should put it away a certain way, and it should be presented in secret or in some other ritual that isn't like out in the open.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna jump to Obio. If you don't mind telling us your age.
I mind. No, I'm kidding.
Oh,
no, I'm joking. I'm 27.
That question. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm 27. So, and I think my age definitely has influenced how I present and how I interact with my sexuality for sure. I think, I don't know how candid we're being on this. I don't want to go too far.
You go, be honest, open, and straightforward.
So I think generations before me, and honestly, my generation, I think we started seeing representation in media when I was in like high school, college. So I already kind of developed who I was by then. And so I think for most gay men, we develop who we are through sexual activity, right? Because the only time we can really see two men interacting with each other is through porn. Let's just be candid. And so I think to then take that and then be able to learn ourselves in our fullness is very difficult, right? Because like, we're not just sexual people. There's so much more to the spectrum. But again, only time I'm seeing two guys in a pleasurable, enjoyable experience outside of being, you know, infected with HIV and this very like, you know, DL narrative that's been written is through porn. I see happy gay men in porn, that's it. And so I think for me, I kind of struggled to romanticize men, you know what I mean? Because I didn't see any men in romantic situations. I didn't see couples. I didn't see fathers and fathers. I didn't see people adopting kids. I didn't see surrogacy. I didn't see all the things. And so for me, it was more like a fun thing to do, right? Like I was attracted to men and it's fun, have a good time, but there was nothing else to then do because I didn't know what else would happen. And so I think for me, and to Dr. Anderson's point, you see younger kids coming out at 10 and 11, identifying as trans at 9 because they're able to see like, oh wait, like there's possibilities and there's like, you know, enjoy in these moments. Whereas I think for the most of us who are out of that generation and above, we didn't get the opportunity. So I think my generation definitely influenced how I interacted with my sexuality.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
sure.
did we, I'm sorry, forgive me, did we finish answering the question? I know Dr. Hayes did, your understanding of the treatment of women. Did everybody
Dr. Anderson go?
Go ahead, Dr. Anderson.
So I will say this, that my experience has definitely evolved over time. I think that one of the responsibilities that I do carry as a Black, queer, or gay man is to protect women, very specifically Black women. For me, that has become an important marker because I sort of have seen the mistreatment. And as much as like my work and my research and my writing is centered around how we need to stand for Black men, I do know that women carry the the burden and the rut of Black men not having access. So for me, it is very personal in terms of how I engage with women and what that looked like and the level of respect that they get by default.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else want to elaborate on that, or are we good? Shall we move on? I'm guessing that's yes.
I'm 51.
Oh,
and,
I'm sorry. So I thought we didn't finish. You didn't speak up. So go ahead, Dr. Hayes.
I'm 51, and so I'm of the generation that you just didn't talk about it. And and I will never forget there was a gay group that lived around the corner from us. They were also drag queens, and so my first experience of sort of kind of understanding around that was Fontaine was his name, and he dressed in drag, and he was a drag queen, and that sort of kind of became the whole big, here's the sort of kind of, and not even understanding necessarily what a drag queen was until I sort of kind of got older, and still trying to this whole process of not coming out and sneaking around and going to these cruising spaces and doing all that. So generational for me, it's only until I've gotten older that I've really, really realized I don't have to do that. I'm not going to do that. And I'm still I'm Facebook friends with a lot of my friends from high school. And it really, really sort of kind of saddens me. Like right after marriage equality passed, a lot of them were really, really, some hateful things came up on my feed. And it was time for me to unfriend. I'm not going to sort of kind of be subjected to that. And I think part of that is, I think a lot of it has to do with religion, and two, has to do with sort of kind of generational, like this is what two men and two women don't do.
Okay. So did your treatment of women, your understanding, I know because I know your mother, but what was your understanding of the role of the treatment of women in your community or in the community in general? Dr. Hayes.
The women, and I really, really sort of kind of like Dr. Anderson's response to that, because it solely makes so sense, and it sort of kind of got me to thinking about the Black women in my community it was just so informative in terms of my formative years in terms of understanding of how this worked, because they were while many of my friends had both parents in the house and all that kind of stuff, it was really, really women that were, they were doing the caregiving and the leaders in the church and all those kind of things. So you saw I grew up with these really, really strong, powerful Black women that really, really informed how I operated in terms. So the thought of even disrespecting a woman was just like, that's so foreign to me, because it goes totally against everything that I grew up with, because the women was so strong and so foundational to so many of our developments. Like my mother was a teacher, so she was off in the summer, and everybody on the block, my house became the hangout place in the summer, because all of my friends' parents worked 12 months and my mom didn't. So just the influence of the role in terms of keeping the community together and having those conversations and creating those safe spaces for kids whose moms were off working and dads were off working, my house and my mother became sort of kind of that pillar in the community on that block that we lived on, because my mom was a teacher and she was off in the summer.
Stay tuned for the next episode on How Spaces Define Masculinity, a Black and Black biracial men's initiative.